Hello, everyone. Welcome to STAT's virtual event, The State of Biosimilars, What to Watch. It's sponsored by Samsung Bioepis. And thanks to you all for joining us. My name is Ed Silverman. I'm the PharmaLot columnist and senior writer here at STAT, and I'm sure you know how this works by now. But before we get started, a few quick housekeeping items. At the bottom of your screen, you should see several icons. Please use the chat feature to chat amongst yourselves or to send a message directly to the STAT team. But please don't put your questions for us in the chat section. If you do have a question that you'd like us to ask during the event, please use the Q&A feature to type your question and we'll try to answer it live. In the Q&A window, you should also be able to see the questions that others here are asking today, and you can upvote the questions you would most like to see answered. We will be taking questions throughout the session, so please don't wait until the end to submit them. This is part of what makes these events engaging and fun, and we want to hear from you, and thanks again for being here. Before we get started, though, I'd like to welcome Thomas Newcomer, Head of U.S. Market Access at Samsung Bioepis, for a sponsored introduction of today's event. Hi, Thomas.
Good. Thanks, Ed. Good afternoon, and thank you again for having us today. So far in 2023, we've seen the start of biosimilars being launched within pharmacy benefits. A total of 8 biosimilar brands have entered the pharmacy benefit market, with each undergoing analysis for potential placement as preferred specialty tier products. This is the start of a new beginning for biosimilars in the United States and a meteoric moment as competition will be happening in the largest US drug spending sector. Based on our experience in the US and around the world, biosimilars can act as a pressure valve that helps alleviate the burden of high healthcare costs while improving access to high quality treatments. In the US alone, it is estimated that biosimilars could provide up to $180 billion in healthcare cost savings between 2023 and 2027. This is extremely important because biosimilars play a crucial role in maintaining a healthcare system's sustainability, as the savings from biosimilars can be utilized to improve patient care and outcomes in other areas. Furthermore, biosimilars can help drive continuous innovation in drug development. As biosimilars create competition for marketed products, innovation can happen in fields such as neuroscience, oncology, cell and gene therapy, where there continues to be unmet medical needs. This dynamic provided by biosimilar products benefits the entire healthcare environment. Samsung Bioepis, as one of the leading biopharmaceutical companies, is helping to strengthen sustainability of the healthcare system by developing and advancing a broad range biosimilar portfolio. We have an industry-leading portfolio of 10 biosimilars across immunology, oncology, ophthalmology, hematology, and endocrinology. In the US, 5 of our biosimilars are FDA approved and 4 are commercially available as of today. There is a central theme at Samsung that is known throughout all of the Samsung affiliates. It is to devote the company's talent and technology to create best-in-class products and services that contribute to a better global society. For Samsung Bioepis, this has been translated into a data-driven mindset that allows us to develop biological medicines in the most efficient yet rigorous way possible, so that the quality of the product is maintained at a consistent level from the preclinical development to the large-scale manufacturing. As a result, we've successfully supplied over 51 million units of biosimilar products across 40 global markets. As one of the leading biosimilar developers, it's exciting to be part of the journey that is changing the US healthcare system. I look forward to hearing great insights from our biosimilar experts on today's STAT conversation. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and back to you, Ed.
Thanks, Thomas. Appreciate your time and the introduction. Here to join me today for today's discussion, please welcome Alex Brill, CEO of Matrix Global Advisors, Chris Brown, Managing Partner and Co-founder of Integrity RX Partners, Michael Gonzalez, an independent healthcare consultant at Michael Gonzalez LLC, and a former national and regional account director at AbbVie, and finally, Fran Gregory, Vice President of Emerging Therapeutics at Cardinal Health. Thanks to all of you for joining us today. Appreciate your time very much. I know everybody wants to hear about the big elephant in the room when it comes to biosimilars. I just want to start off, though, with sort of a general question about biosimilars, because there's been so much anticipation for so many years that these will become a big factor in saving money for the healthcare system at large. For instance, the Association for Accessible Medicines, the generic trade group, released a report recently saying that U.S. biosimilars savings increased $7 billion in 2021. Now, of course, they have a vested interest in releasing such a report, but let's take it at face value and say the number is somewhere in that vicinity. Meanwhile, there was a recent study in Health Affairs that looked at Herceptin and biosimilar versions of the Herceptin cancer treatment. And they found that in just 3 years, the researchers for that study found that in just 3 years, the prices of some versions declined by more than half. Some biosimilar versions declined by more than half. And the originator, the brand name medication, lost half of the market. The suggestion is that biosimilars made a difference. So I just want to throw out this basic question before we get into more detail. To what extent do you guys think that biosimilars really have had the expected impact, have had big savings for the healthcare system? And who's benefited from that so far, do you think? Anybody want to tackle that? Should I?
Well, I'll jump in. I remember doing presentations in 2017 and 18, and we had the first biosimilars on the market in 16. The hope and the optimistic hope was that the market would develop and we would see real savings. That didn't happen. And we're now finally at the point where, like you mentioned with Herceptin, as biosimilars pick up market share, we have competition and prices go down, net prices go down. But up until now, it really has been at the margins and not delivered what we were hoping, for sure, on the payer side.
To make a similar point, maybe build in a little bit different direction. I'd agree with Chris that the market developed more slowly than expectations in the early years, and I think there's a variety of factors behind the sort of slow start to this market. It's kind of water under the bridge, perhaps, so not worth exploring in detail. But looking forward, I think when we look at the market at the moment and looking forward, we see roughly, I think, 3 dozen biosimilars in the market, referencing roughly a dozen different reference products and generating billions of dollars in savings. And the question is billions in dollars in savings a lot or a little? And it's hard to answer that question, actually, because of course $7 billion is a huge number, and it's not a huge percent of the total amount that's being spent on biologic drugs in the aggregate. So I think there's definitely more room to grow for this market, but in the last short period of time, I think we have seen a lot of rapid development. And on any individual in any individual market where there is competition, I think we're seeing that competition be fairly robust, and the evidence being the degree to which prices are declining in those markets, and therefore net spend in those markets have declined significantly for those products for which there are biosimilar competitors.
So it sounds like we somewhat moved in the right direction. Okay.
Just not fast enough.
Just not fast enough.
I think if you look at the history of launches, though, like Alex said, maybe the first ones, we were kind of testing the waters a bit. and maybe they weren't as fast as what we would have liked as far as uptake is considered. However, I still think the first biosimilar that launched in the US is still a huge success story. Filgrastim has a huge market share now, and it's highly utilized in that supportive oncology therapeutic arena. And when we look at some of the more recently launched biosimilars, if we think about the trastuzumabs and the bevacizumabs, I think those are great success stories. And again, we're not maybe where we want to be as far as the number of billions that we consider success from a savings perspective. But I think we're making huge progress. I agree, when we tried to forecast these drugs 10 years ago, we expected huge numbers right out of the gate, huge, many, many more billions of dollars of savings right out of the gate than what we saw. But I do think, when we start looking at the future and we start looking at what's happening more recently and in, even this year, we're definitely seeing those market share numbers tick up. And, my favorite thing to see is the total molecule cost decreasing overall. So not only the launch price of the biosimilar product, but the additional discounts that we're seeing with the reference product that bring that total molecule cost down from anywhere, 15 to 50% is what we're seeing now. And hopefully we'll see even more of that in the future. So maybe not perfect, but definitely slowly moving in the right direction.
Ed, I think when you look back in history at the small molecule products, in my lifetime, I think the biggest and fastest switch I ever saw, based on units anyway, was when Lipitor went generic, and within 2 quarters, generics dominated with almost 80%. I think there was that expectation that biosimilars were going to replicate that, but to Fran's point, and Alex and Chris actually made the same comments, is that hasn't happened. Competitive pricing, that is the first actionable viewpoint when you see that. But it remains to be seen. What's the unit volume? How is that going to change?
All right, so let's use this moment to pivot to what I call the elephant in the room, which is biosimilar versions of Humira. I think a lot of people are curious, very curious to know what's going to happen. But before we look ahead, let's just make sure we all recall where we're at. In the last couple of weeks, a whole bunch more biosimilar versions arrived on the market. There was introduction of another 1 or 2 earlier in the year. We're expected to have maybe as many as 10 by the time 2023 is over. But it might sound a little silly to say that not all biosimilars are similar for the moment, because just finding my teleprompter notes, they're not all citrate free, which refers to, and we can get into that, and the high concentration versus low concentration. They're not all of them are fully interchangeable. We'll talk about what that means. They also all have different prices. Some of them were launched with list prices that are very similar to what AbbVie charges, and some that are much lower. So there's a lot of moving parts. There are a lot of different things to consider as we try and sort out where this is headed. So my first question is, what should we make of the different pricing that we're seeing? As an example, Amgen launched earlier this year. Their wholesale acquisition cost or list price is just 5% lower than AbbVie's, but there's also another deal where that WAC is 55% below the AbbVie price, the brand name price. A couple of companies have also launched with much lower discounts, 85 or 86% off the AbbVie price, but then a few others have 5% off. So how do we sort this out? What's behind these different pricing strategies, and how, and more important, how does that matter to the payer and the patient?
So I guess I'll kick us off on this one. you know, in our world, we're all familiar with the terms low WAC and high WAC strategy and what that kind of means. So we saw the first biosimilar adalimumab come to market kind of with that high WAC scenario. So we know that that is an attractive scenario for a payer PBM potentially, due to some discounts that are seen, you know, post dispensing or post selling of the product. So if we think about that as one strategy, that's been a successful strategy in some situations. Now we're seeing, like we saw with the insulins, you know, I think the insulins kind of gave us this idea with the high WAC, low WAC strategy with biosimilar pricing, and it apparently is catching on. So now we're seeing some products come to market with the low WAC strategy, which, like you said, Ed, is this 85, 86% off price tag for the biosimilar product. To complicate things even more, we have some products coming to market with a high WAC and a low WAC. So, you know, pick your poison, if you will. So it gives optionality for sure to payers and to PBMs and to pharmacies. And it also confuses the situation even more than maybe what it was already. So I think that, you know, we saw this play out a little bit, unfortunately in the insulin space, which is really our only pharmacy benefit biosimilar that we have experience with in the US. And that was not maybe the success story that we all hoped it would be right up front, right? We're still only seeing, I think, maybe 8-10% market share in the biosimilar insulin space if you look at the, you know, high WAC, low WAC strategy product. So taking that into this wave of adalimumab biosimilars, we're certainly hoping to see a much more rapid uptake, although we know the formularies and the payer decision making will have a lot to do with that. But I think that, you know, if I were to hope for the best scenario, it would be that we haven't created so much confusion and chaos in the space that it's, you know, even more challenging than it should be for these products to come to market.
Well, what's more enticing for the payer, the WAC price that's close to the brand name or the discounted price? The much lower discounted price. And anybody want to explain how that might shake out? Because it may not be clear to everybody. And in any event, now there's so many different permutations. What should we expect payers to start doing? We've seen some formulary placement announcements made, but we don't really know how that's going to look in the next 6 or 12 months when we see how costs really shake out.
Yeah, Ed, so it depends on the business model. If you're a PBM and you're offering your client rebate guarantees, you're probably going to want a product that has a high WAC because everything is driven off percentages. You're going to get a much higher rebate that you can put into the pile so that you can satisfy your client based on their bottom line. If you're looking for a low WAC would be those types of clients who you know don't want to pay, you know, don't want to wait for the rebate. They'd rather pay on a lower. Those would be price sensitive accounts like Medicare accounts, Medicaid, and so forth. That's kind of a generalization. Because there's thousands of types of these agreements there, but that's a large kind of categorization.
So, Michael, or maybe to both of you, Michael and Fran, this duality or this option framework where there's multiple scenarios, there's multiple prices for the same product. This seems to me to be a positive that the choices are good things, right? Like it's nice to have choices. It doesn't have to be one size fits all. I know that there's a lot of kind of, you know, Fran, you were saying sort of confusion around this. And I agree that like in the sort of broad sphere of discussion of this topic, there seems to be a lot of confusion, like which one is the right one and which one's the real one. But to the participants in the marketplace, it's not confusing at all, I think, right? I mean, they totally understand what the options are, right? They have choices. They can choose the high WAC rebate channel, or they can go the lower price. And it, as Michael, you were saying, it's a function of what's important to them, right? And so shouldn't we, my sense is that we should welcome this dual framework because it creates options for the participants in the marketplace. And that while like in the broad spectrum, people might be confused about it, like the people who matter in this decision making, they're not confused at all. Am I thinking about that correctly?
I think you're right. You know, I mean, we've all been in the seat where we're making a formulary decision, or we're making a launch pricing decision, or, you know, we're making some similar decision. And it's not a confusing decision to us at that time because we're in the middle of it, right? But if you take a step back and think, okay, I have citrate free, I have citrate containing, I have high concentration, I have low concentration, I have 8 to 10 different injection devices, I have high WAC, I have low WAC, I have high rebate, I have low rebate. Oh, and I have pharmacy benefit, which I'm not really all that used to yet to begin with. That could be confusing to some people, right? If you're not in the middle of this every day. I think to your point, optionality is probably good in a lot of discussions and in a lot of formats that we might be thinking about as professionals in the healthcare industry that we are. But then think about the patient, right? So at the end of the day, what is the patient getting out of this? You know, as a pharmacist, I think I always have the patient kind of in mind at the end of the day. And I would love for a patient to be really confident about what they're getting. I would love for them to be able to see cost savings at the end of the day, significant cost savings when we look at some of these low WAC prices that are being offered that would definitely benefit patients more likely than the high WAC price tags. So, you know, if you look at the big picture and think about the end user, it is very confusing to a lot of people. And, you know, I get questions every day about, you know, what does this mean again? And how does this pull through financially? And how does this benefit the patient or not? So I do think we might take for granted that it's relatively simple to us, but, you know, the big picture being that biosimilars aren't perfectly being accepted by the market today. It would be nice if we could find a simple approach to make these successful more quickly. But I agree, to most of us here in the room, not.
Fran, if I can tag onto what you said, who benefits from all this confusion? We've had many, well, what did we say, eight different biosimilars launched this year. What hasn't happened is Humira has not been removed from any major formulary. It's at parity. There used to be a campaign years ago, the easy button. And I think for AbbVie, it would be, we're the easy button. Look at everything that's out there where everybody's trying to reference us and you know what you got with us. Plus, we'll still offer full support for your patients. All the education, onboarding, $5 copay cards, and so forth.
I've got to jump in and disagree 100% with Alex.
All right.
The PBM might benefit and enjoy a low WAC, high WAC option. And they know what the high WAC option, the net cost is, because they know what the rebate is. The people who are actually paying for the drug, the payers, don't get to see that. And what they hear from the PBM is, trust us, the reference product, the brand, or the one we've chosen that has a rebate, that's a lower price. The people I work with, they want the lowest price. I don't think they necessarily care how we get there, but without the clarity of what the rebate actually is, which we're never going to get, the result is plan sponsors do want to see a low price at the counter. And, you know, in terms of Ed asked at the beginning, like, what about patients? If you're paying cash, the Coherus Smart Cuban option is the only thing you've got. But Michael's right that for branded biotech products, and I'm sure the high WAC versions, there'll be a coupon. So if you have insurance, it's not really the high deductible that's driving you away. The coupon is keeping you on it. But employers want to see the price go down, and they want to know that it really did go down. And they're not getting that today.
Just to clarify, that's because you think that, not because that's because the employer doesn't have trust in the contract, but doesn't have understanding in the contract between their entity and the PBM, and they don't have insight into the
well, I mean, the understanding is, I wouldn't use that word because the PBM doesn't want them to understand. So it's the complexity in the contract's the point. It's not that they don't want to know, but in my hope is on something like Humira, where it's such a big drug that when you evaluate, you could say, all right, give me a guaranteed rebate, and tell me what your net price is on Humira and biosimilars. Like, it's big enough to be treated differently, because if you're focused on rebate, you're right. The PBM is going to give you the high WAC product. And you know what? If they're not focused on rebate, the PBM might still want to give them the high WAC product, because I see biosimilars excluded from rebates. So, you know, if they're excluded by the PBM, well, they want the high WAC product because they can keep the money. So it's just really challenging for the employer to understand, or the health plan for that matter.
I have a question here. There's a little prelude to the question, so bear with me. A high WAC approach for a new to market drug isn't necessarily better to PBMs because of rebate guarantees. The guarantees are already in place based on the rebates that are currently paid. More important, most rebate guarantees are per brand drug guarantees. And the brand drug definitions and contracts allow the PBMs to basically manipulate those guarantees. So the PBMs don't really care about needing to satisfy them. The high WAC strategy enables the manufacturer to pay more in non-rebates to incentivize the PBM to select that manufacturer. What do you think of that analysis?
There's truth there for sure.
Okay. Fair enough.
Okay. You know, and it's why
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Ed.
No, please continue.
Well, just you know, that kind of, I think, ties into my comment about the complexity of the contract and how things are treated. A brand is not a brand is not a brand. And so the PBM contracts are really, it's difficult to follow exactly how the drugs are going to be treated and what's going to get paid and what's not going to get paid on a rebate, which kind of goes back to, from my mind, it's this challenge. We felt like, hey, biosimilars are going to be the generics of the biotech marketplace. But what branded small molecule product has the generic at the same tier as the branded product? I mean, it just doesn't exist. And I think a big piece of that, and why people want that clarity, they have these games, and if they can see what the real price is, they feel better that they're actually getting it because they know it's getting paid, not hidden away.
Before we continue on this path, I just wanted to stop for a second and get a reality check on the extent to which it matters whether a biosimilar is interchangeable, high or low concentration, citrate-free. Anyone want to take a stab at just explaining this to folks who aren't quite familiar with some of these nitty-gritties?
I guess I'll take a stab at that from, kind of a clinical perspective. If you think about the Humira original product, it was a higher volume product and it was a citrate containing product. And then, as part of manufacturer life cycle management of a product, they're always trying to innovate and come out with a better, more patient-friendly solution, more cost-effective solution, maybe a better dosage form or a, less painful injection device. So that's what we kind of have seen with Humira as it evolved over time, is that the product now is available in a citrate-free formulation, which means it doesn't cause the stinging as much as the citrate-containing formulation might when injected into the patient. And it's also available in a lower volume, which is now considered the low concentration or the high concentration formulation. So these clinical attributes, I guess, add value from maybe a patient perspective or physician's perspective to the quality of that product or the patient experience that that product offers. Then when we look at the biosimilars that have come to market, I am so impressed with these biosimilar companies and their ability to flex quickly. Many of the biosimilar products are launching with high concentration formulations, citrate-free formulations at launch. And it's absolutely impressive to me. And the fact that they're able to do this and remain so competitive so quickly should give them free access to compete in this market, right? The interchangeability designation, I always say, is absolutely not a clinical designation. It's a regulatory designation. It only exists in the US, and it is just an additional set of clinical studies that are required, switching studies that are required by manufacturers in order to obtain this regulatory designation. Whether or not it matters, I think is yet to be determined. I'd love to hear the others comment as well. But, we only really, again, have experience with that interchangeable insulin example on the pharmacy benefit side so far. And again, I don't think it's shown necessarily any spectacular results to us being interchangeable. We do have an interchangeable, one interchangeable biosimilar adalimumab product currently. So I think it's to be seen whether or not that makes a big difference, right? When we think of interchangeability as this regulatory designation, we also have state and board of pharmacy requirements that may make the process of interchangeable products at the pharmacy counter still not really straightforward for a biosimilar, unfortunately. So I don't think the interchangeable biosimilarity definition or regulatory designation is necessarily a slam dunk for sure, but it could potentially be an advantage in certain situations. And I think that, again, is yet to be really confirmed.
Ed, I don't think it matters at all. And if it matters some, it's a teeny tiny bit. For the reasons Fran cited, you might have to call anyway. And the PBM, these drugs are done, 80% of them are done at specialty pharmacies, typically managed by the PBM. They have a whole call, letter, communication infrastructure to move people from a preferred or non-preferred brand product or an excluded product to a preferred product. That could easily be repurposed on a biosimilar. They make the phone call. It's what they do every day. The question is, will they do it? Not whether they can. So whether it's interchangeable or not.
That's a huge.
The last thing I'll say, Semglee taught us that just being interchangeable and low cost doesn't necessarily and doesn't get you market share. So.
Especially in these indications. And I mean, Humira has 11 indications. Okay, and there's a lot of different specialists who are treating them. There is a term in the market called non-medical switching, which is frowned upon. There's no medical association who endorses non-medical switching. So if you have a patient on in this case, we're talking about Humira, why switch? If everything, like I said, the easy button, right? There are certain specialists like pediatric specialists, GI specialists. Actually, going back to the GI infliximab Remicade story, there was a high degree. They just wouldn't switch them because if you're a GI patient with ulcerative colitis or one of the other intestinal diseases, if you flare, you could end up right back in the hospital and be subject to surgery again. So, I mean, Chris made an actual, I'm sorry, Chris, I didn't mean it that way. I was just going to say you made an excellent point. There still is physician preference out there, and they may say, I don't want my patient switched for anything.
I just go back to the point that Fran made earlier about how how difficult it is to know and difficult it will be to observe the importance of interchangeables. And that has to do with her other comments, I think, which is, around the citrate and the citrate free and the high dose and the low dose. I mean, so what we've got so many different versions here and only one interchangeable biosimilar at present. And the success of that interchangeable biosimilar is a function of a whole lot of other factors, right? And so if it turns out to be super successful, I don't think that proves anything about the success of interchangeable biosimilars because it's just an N of one. And so we do have definitely, I would agree, we shouldn't understand it to mean better. We should understand it to mean what it is, which is that there were additional studies that were conducted. And I think we should definitely, as Chris was saying, keep in mind the distribution structure and the sophistication of the specialty pharmacies. So there is a chance that it helps. I think that's why a number of companies are pursuing interchangeable designations. BI has it. Others it's in the works, I understand, for others. So people think that it might matter. And then if it actually matters or not, time will tell.
All right, let's pivot back to some of the rebate and coverage issues. Someone here, while you were answering this question, someone referred back to the discussion of about 10 minutes ago. Do employers really know the benefits of the different biosimilars? refers to a recent story that found, it was in Stat actually, recent story found that the so-called benefit plans consultants are not working to get the best benefits for the employers. Instead, they're more often or sometimes colluding more with the PBMs. So this person says, well, from my naive point of view, the confusion is just that one drug, but multiply this 1,000 times. Question is, how can a small business employer have any idea what to do with all these different options that are out there and maybe not being presented by the folks they're contracting with?
Well, it's a huge problem, is what it boils down to, because, you know, you're a widget maker, you have 500 employees, you're not supposed to be a pharmacy expert. And ideally, the payer, that employer, and the PBM should be on the same side. The PBM should be representing the employer, and I think they'd argue that they do. But it just gets murky when you can't understand what they're doing to represent your interests. And you're looking to them. They often won't take fiduciary responsibility, usually don't, but you're looking to them to be the expert. And the fact that you're having and concerned about what they're doing is a challenge for you. And right, so the logical conclusion is we'll go to somebody who can help you. And then you see a story like you did in Stat, where the person that you're hiring to kind of watch the watchdog maybe isn't so much on your side as you thought. And that's certainly a challenge. So find a new watchdog, but it's a challenge.
Another question from the audience. I want to make sure we get to as many as possible. The issue of the wholesale acquisition because became a thing with high deductibles, with pharmacy benefit, not leveraging the discounts, rebates negotiated. If we got rid of rebates, what would the role of biosimilars be in this scenario?
Well, if rebates were gone, and when I say rebates, I mean all manufacturer money, not just rebates. So let's talk about all of these incentives. It seems to me that's going to push, when you have multiple suppliers, towards the lowest net price. I mean, that's what we should want. And pharmacy is a well-functioning market, and we don't really have that. And you're not going to get it when you have a brand and one biosimilar. And if we can't get it with 10 or 8 or 9, then we got a real problem.
So we haven't had that experience of living in a world without rebates, but we almost did. And we flirted with that world with a regulatory proposal in the previous administration to limit rebates. And we don't, and because it didn't come through fruition, we don't know exactly, but we know what the expectations were, and that the expectations were in part that net prices would not go down, but that rather there'd be a reallocation of those rebate dollars across the system, and some of it would be enjoyed by the manufacturers. So some of it would be preserved in the hands of the manufacturers, and that some of it would not materialize at all. Some of that benefit, those dollars, would not materialize to the payers at the end of the day. Those are expectations, those are forecasts, those were analytics. So we don't know for sure, but that was sort of the best guess by the actuaries at the time. It would have created the transparency that I think a lot of people are desiring, but it wouldn't necessarily have yielded the reduction in net costs, which I think others also think are really important, and I think is really important.
If I can add to that, I think one of the best examples of where lowest net cost is really valuable is when you look at the oncology care model. And yes, it was not perfect, right? Obviously, some probably just will leave my comments at that. It was not perfect. However, if we look at the net impact of the OCM and potentially, expanding that to the impact of uptake of oncology biosimilars, I think there was a real connection there. And I do think that because providers were being incentivized to get to the lowest total cost of care or net cost for treating that patient, that condition, biosimilars were very attractive, right? Because they offered a lower cost, and the providers were not necessarily benefiting from the higher priced product like they would be outside of a value-based care type of model. So I feel like, if we really want to talk about where we could draw examples, real examples of the benefit of lowest net cost products. OCM is kind of a good example of that. But I agree in the pharmacy benefit, we won't have that luxury of, competing by price in a true value-based type of network. And, there will definitely be a lot more complexities and behind the scenes exchange of funds that will definitely make that cost and the decrease in the cost over time less transparent to see.
One of you, I think it was Michael, mentioned that, hey, with all the sudden arrival, this flurry of biosimilars falling from the sky, the AbbVie drug is still making the grade. It's on the formularies. And I'm wondering what this says about AbbVie's clout, what this might say about concerns we've heard from the FTC about rebate walls, rebate traps. Is this situation playing out right now? Does it have the potential to cause greater scrutiny of some of these arrangements? I mean, is this perhaps a classic scenario that we'll see peel back the curtain on some of these arrangements that everybody wants to know more about? Or is it really much ado about nothing? What should we expect here? And again, what does this say about AbbVie's cloud?
Well, they have a lot of clout for sure. The fact that they've been able to keep Humira at bay or biosimilars at bay until they've offered replacement products that they can shift people to. But I want to go back. Michael mentioned Lipitor losing patent protection and having rapid generic take-up. That happened virtually all the time because retail pharmacies wanted to switch to generics when they made money. When I was at Express Scripts in 2005, one of our marketing stories was, we're putting Zocor on our formulary and we're taking Lipitor off. And we're doing that because mid-year Zocor is going to have a generic and we'll be able to switch everybody to it. As far as I can tell, no PBM said, we're going to put Humira on our formulary. We're going to try and get as many people on that as we can because of biosimilars coming, and then we'll be able to move them to that lower cost drug. And the fact that we didn't see something like that really indicates the power of AbbVie and any brand manufacturer in keeping their product on formulary. They have a lot of money. So
also a pricing strategy on Lipitor's part, right? I mean, Lipitor, correct me, held their price, right? Small molecule brand drugs hold their price high when generics enter the market, and biosimilars, Humira included, cut their price when biosimilars enter. And so we get different market dynamics because the participants are acting differently in the market. I think it's interesting how much, I totally agree, Chris, that AbbVie's got clout, tremendous. Clout's a nice word, I think, to describe the situation. But they've also lowered their price, their net price significantly. That's how they're flexing their muscle, I think, and how they're holding on here. And they have lower revenues and there's less healthcare spending as a result. That's not to say it's like, I don't mean to suggest that it's perfect or that it's great or anything like that. But the point I'm making is that the system is realizing savings without everyone having to switch to the biosimilar, which is just different than it is, generally speaking, in the small molecule market, where the savings only occur if you switch to the generic.
Good point.
Well, then what is the role of the biosimilar then? Just to drive down the reference price? I mean, somebody could look at it like that. That's what happened in Europe. There were manufacturers who got approval in Europe and never launched because the price went down so rapidly. Different economic systems, healthcare systems, we know that. They never launched because they could never recoup their investment costs there. They're here in the US.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too.
Now, so maybe this is where they're trying to make it up.
I think if you look at the big picture too, though, all of the discussions on rebates and discounts and pricing, biosimilars are bringing competition, right? And these prices would not ever decrease. And we have proof of that, right? Since biologics came to market many years ago, those prices have increased exponentially year over year. We know that these price tags would never come down if it weren't for biosimilars coming to market as a whole, right? I mean, I think we've got plenty of proof of that. And I think, we want to see that continue. And we want to see, competition continue to help aid patient access. That's what we intend for biosimilars to do. So, I kind of think, there are some things that payer PBMs are doing right. Having been at one for years, I know they do look at the clinical impact that the drugs have on the patient and have on the system and have on the provider. And I think those changes don't happen overnight. Yes, there are financial pieces. I'm not ignoring that. There are rebates, but I'm also considering the fact that not all patients or providers are on day one going to want to switch every patient that they have being treated with a reference product to a biosimilar. That will come with time. I think we've seen proof of that in other molecules. But, if you think about maybe the good, and yes, I'm a forever optimist, I confess. If you think about maybe some of the good things that payer PBMs are trained to do too, is gradually ease into this so that patients have a good experience, providers have a good experience, and that, we can get more clinical acceptance over time and maybe not as much kickback from some of those physicians or prescribers, and kind of have this happen over time. Again, that financially benefits most PBMs as well, but I think there might be some good to come to that too. Of course, I want to see biosimilars come to market and be successful 100% of the time every day, but also I want to make sure that patients understand the value, that patients see the value, and also that physicians and prescribers are on board with us too.
So I have a reader who wants to make this point rather than ask a question. This person contends that AbbVie lowering its price is not necessarily resulting in savings. AbbVie may have reduced the amount of the rebates it's paying for its drug. So plans' actual net costs for Humira, tomato, may not have changed at all. In fact, their costs may have increased, although the plans don't know it, if AbbVie decreased the amount it was paying in rebates more than AbbVie decreased its WAC, its wholesale cost. Anybody want to respond to that, take exception, say it's right, say it's partly right? What's your thought? Because it really speaks to the flow of money, right? And who's making out here, and who wins, who loses.
I mean, I wouldn't see AbbVie reducing their WAC price. If they're going to drop the net price, it's going to be with rebates and do it behind the scenes and try and keep on formulary that way. What I do kind of wonder, and I haven't seen this yet, because although we have these biosimilars out for Humira, there haven't been huge changes in formulary. And when they've been added, it's usually at parity with Humira, and in some cases not available until you go through a PA on Humira, which is not what we're looking for. But what I do wonder is, are some PBMs going to try and split the difference where they pick a lower WAC price, show how the cost at the counter is lower, but still keep some piece in the rebate, and not kind of talk about that fact, really focus on the fact that they got the net cost lower. I'm sorry, the WAC lower at the counter in the AWP, but still keep some rebate, and emphasize the story that, hey, we fought that to get the price down at the counter.
I've only heard the name Mark Cuban once in this discussion, which makes me think perhaps the impact he and his company might have isn't all that significant. But would someone straighten me out? He's going to offer the Coherus biosimilar for approximately $600. How does that move, or maybe it won't, how does that move potentially impact health plans and PBMs over the next few months? Because it suggests that his company's looking at doing this however many more times. Is there something to this, or is it really not that significant?
I don't know for sure. I'll just say there's sort of two pieces here. There's the price and the volume that are going to matter to the story of how important Mark Cuban is to this market. And what we know is the price, and the price is low. What we don't know is what the volume is going to be. And so I think from my perspective, from where I sit, the question really is how much product can move through that channel will really tell us a lot about what kind of impact his firm and it's trying to really be disruptive, I think, in an interesting, challenging way in the marketplace. How disruptive that model could be is a function of how many people are actually going to get product through that channel versus it being more of a headline grabbing story, but without a lot of product behind it. And I don't know the answer either way. If it's a lot of volume, it's going to be a lot of impact.
But you love
I see it.
Oh, that
I see.
kind of gets into benefit designs. I'm sorry, I was just going to say that gets into the benefit designs. I mean, you know, so I heard him say $595, they're going to do some kind of a cash deal, $595. And if you're a patient on a high deductible health plan, which majority of Americans who have commercial insurance are nowadays, okay, $595 sounds pretty good, but I can still get this for $5 on a copay card.
I don't think it's going to change employer
And
behavior.
I want to go to that Ed Sheeran concert.
Right. Michael's right. I mean, Mark Cuban's going after people who have some money but don't have insurance. But where I do think it's important, let's just use the $600. Humira costs $7,000. Typical rebate for an employer is $3,500 on a specialty drug. Their net's $3,500 on Humira. They can go to their PBM and say, why am I paying $3,500 when I could go buy this from Mark Cuban for $600?
Yep.
Explain to me what the difference is, because you're giving me a rebate of $3,500. That's not cheaper than what I could do with Mark Cuban, and that is going to force. It just sets a reference point. And I think, as I understand the Coherus product, it's basically the drug, and that's it. And Michael's mentioned how you often have nursing, you have some support. Now, maybe that's worth bundling in with the drug or not, but at least we now know a company can make this drug and manufacture it and sell it for $600. Maybe we shouldn't be paying $3,500.
One thing that I like that I'm seeing though is that, you know, Coherus isn't the only one that's come out with that very low price. So I know the Hadlima is also a very low price product, a low WAC. So I think that shows that there are, you know, again, different choices, different options. Maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's not, but I do think that access at the end of the day is the most important thing to patients. And I'm not sure how broad Cuban's network is. I don't know how exactly broad reaching that is just yet, but I do think, you know, the more acceptance that a product has throughout the traditional channels, unfortunately, they're not going away right now today. You know, we would love to see, at least I would love to see these lower WAC products be successful in very large, you know, networks. So really improving patient access, which is what I think the goal at the end of the day is.
One thing I want to say about Mark Cuban, if you look at the volume of the pharmacy, that's kind of a rounding error in the business. But when I talk to payers, Mark Cuban comes up all the time. His name with that pharmacy makes people ask about it. So if you just look at the volume, I don't think you're getting the story of what the kind of the mind share and what the impact is on the market. Chris, and this might be overstating, but Tesla came out, it had a teeny tiny market share, but it changed the trajectory of the car industry. And hopefully we can change the trajectory of the pharmacy industry.
Chris, could I just ask a little bit more about that? Because I think it's super interesting that sort of that the Mark Cuban model is kind of being leveraged and has impacts even if you don't buy from Mark Cuban, right? That's what you're saying, is that people know about it, yeah. And then they're going back to the PBM and they're saying, hey, you know, I don't want this deal. I want what Mark Cuban's doing. You got to do better for me. Otherwise, I'm going to go to Mark Cuban. But for that sort of threat or dynamic to work, like, Mark Cuban's got to have enough product to be able to move, like that an employer could say to the PBM, I don't want your big rebate. I'm sending all my employees to Mark Cuban, and Mark Cuban then has to be able to fulfill those orders, right? Is that threat reasonable?
I don't think if I thought that he could pick up enough market share that he would have a delivery problem, that's not what's holding him back. So it's not really about the delivery, and more there. I mean, we're only talking about one biosimilar. Most of this is on generics that are at cheap prices. They're just showing how much the PBM marks up generics typically at their specialty pharmacy. So if Cuban can get a partnership with a PBM and tie that in, and it's not going to be with one of the big ones because they have a vested interest in the status quo and keeping that going. But if some smaller PBMs start to focus on those drugs, partner with him, leverage his brand name, I think it will have a change in trajectory. Because when you have somebody who's paying, a plan sponsor's paying $1,800 for generic Gleevec, and they see it on GoodRx for $35, it makes them question the value of the PBM who's supposed to be getting them the best deal. And Mark Cuban just underscores that point.
What if he did?
Pharmacy.
What if he did something like go to a jumbo employer? Walmart has 1 million covered lives, and cuts a deal with them and said, for all your future adalimumab patients, here's our product at X price. That gives him publicity. Gives him another point to say, look, we are making a difference, albeit small, in the grand scheme of things in the market.
Well,
That'd be great.
Here's a crystal ball question. Given the number of biosimilars for Humira, how many do you folks think are likely to succeed? If you hit the fast forward button, 12, 18, 24 months, pick something kind of short term. Is there room for more than 1 or 2 biosimilars, 3? And if there's only 2, let's say, what does that say about the potential savings as opposed to having all these choices we were looking at and talking about today?
Because we're sponsored by Samsung, we probably should mention that one, right? That's a winner. It's gonna be a winner. Thomas?
Bioepsis all the way. Well, what I'd say is Humira is a big enough market. There's enough sales that you could supply. You could have, I'd love to run a business that has $1 billion a year in revenue. I think I could make money doing that. So there's plenty of room in Humira. On high volume generics, you do have multiple manufacturers. Where I get more concerned is when the market is small. And then how do you have lots of manufacturers? And maybe you only have 1 or 2. And then think about, I hate to mention his name, but I'll say it, Martin Shkreli and Daraprim, small product, 1 supplier, ability to game the system by buying it out. We need multiple suppliers. I just don't know how you maintain that on a small volume drug.
Yeah, I would take the over.
I don't worry.
I think that this market can support a lot of manufacturers. If the number is 8 or 7 or 6 or 9 or 10, I don't know for sure, but it's not 1 or 2 or 3. It's going to be a market with a lot of biosimilar competitors.
All right, well, we're just about out of time. If anybody else in the audience has one more question, they want to pop in the Q&A channel before we wrap up. Okay, here's one. How will the Medicare out-of-pocket limit in 2025 affect this issue? Any takers?
Don't know.
Field. Nope. Maybe it won't have any effect.
Too long of an answer, maybe, for being out of time. Yeah, complex.
Okay. All right. Well,
Hey, Ed, could I just say one last point?
please.
Just something that came up in a conversation. I was talking to a PBM, and it was their read that the Consolidated Appropriation Act, which makes the plan sponsor a fiduciary or keeps them a fiduciary and make decisions on behalf of their members, is going to have an impact on high WAC, low WAC, because irrespective of the coupon, if you pick the high WAC product, that's a high counter price. And is that good for your member? And a low WAC product has a low counter price. And they pointed me to a post on LinkedIn where it was basically a class action lawsuit against plan sponsors. I've not seen anything really develop with that, but I kind of wonder if that doesn't portend, something happening that will impact, kind of out of left field on where we go with pricing. Alex, you're nodding. I'm curious. Have you heard about that?
No, I'm nodding because I think because what you're saying is interesting. I'm not nodding because I have an opinion or I know the answer.
I want to see
I'm
the
just
lawsuit.
watching at this point.
Send me the lawsuit. All right.
Okay.
Well,
Always happy to give you a story.
thank you. And with that last thought, I think we're about out of time, as I mentioned. Thanks again to Alex, Chris, Michael, and Fran for joining me today and for answering some good questions, really great questions from our audience. Thanks to our event sponsor, Samsung Bioepis, and to all of you out there for taking the time to join us. Here's a quick promotional note. STAT has 2 upcoming summits this fall. The inaugural STAT Future Summit will take place virtually September 5th through 7th. And the 2023 STAT Summit will be taking place October 18th and 19th in Boston and virtually as well. More information can be found on our website. Thanks again, everybody, for tuning in today. Great seeing you. Hope you enjoyed it. Look forward to seeing you again at the next session.